Okay, Adam, are you ready?
Ready to go.
Perfect. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining on this Thursday evening in the UK, morning or afternoon over in the US. Thank you very much, and welcome to everybody else who's joining on the YouTube. So thanks a lot, Adam, for joining us today. Adam's going to be talking us through using layers in Tableau 2020.4. It's an incredibly new feature. And it's very exciting, and I think there's lots of things that you can do with it, and hopefully Adam's going to put some light into that magic. So Adam, over to you.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everybody, or good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. Thanks for attending this session. This is using layers in Tableau 2020.4. First, I want to thank the Information Lab for hosting this session, and specifically Lorna and staff for organizing it and for asking me to host. I appreciate it. Layers is a really cool feature. I don't usually get excited about new features in Tableau. I'm not one of those people that cheer at Tableau conference when new features are announced, but this is a really cool feature. There's a lot of possibility. It really opens up your imagination of the types of things you can create with it. So I hope you walk away today with an understanding of how to begin using it to create your own either data visualizations or maps. And we're going to walk through both today. First, a little about myself, who I am, and why you're listening to me. I am currently the head of analytics at KeyMe, and we're a tech startup based here in New York City. We make a robotic kiosk that scans and copies your keys. I have been using Tableau since Tableau 6. That is not the year 6. Tableau used to serialize based off of sequentially, not based off of years. So I haven't been using Tableau for over 2,000 years, but I have been using it for about 10 years. I also run the data visualization blog called Dueling Data. This workbook will be posted there after the session. So if you're struggling to follow along with something specifically I'm doing, a calculated field I wrote or something like that, don't worry, you can download the workbook after the session on my website. So talking about layers, I think Tableau's intent behind layers was to make maps more, make richer maps. And that's obviously something you can do with layers. It's how they advertise the product. And we're going to spend a decent part of this session talking about how to create new maps with the new layers features. But we're also going to talk about how to make more compelling data visualizations as well. So how do you create a map in the past with Tableau? So the easy thing first is click state. Oops, sorry, wrong file. I'm using Superstore dataset here. So if you want to follow along at home, but double click state. Back 10 years ago, this was an amazing feature. Just double clicking state and having it render a choropleth map instantly, having our lat and longs generated automatically from Tableau, so you don't have to enter your lat longs, your coordinates, your projection systems, anything like that. That alone was a pretty cool feature. And if I want to add a second layer, I would either hold Control or Command, depending on if you're a MacBook or not. Change the mark type to a circle. Add city. I'm going to make it size by sales. And I'm going to reduce the transparency, make them black. And then I'm going to right click on my longitude and select a dual axis. That is how you would create a map in Tableau in the old version. You are limited to 2 layers. You're leveraging 2 axes, your lat and your long axis, your row and your column axis. And you're only able to add one additional layer by duplicating your longitude or your latitude axis. So you're also essentially limited to only 2 marks. The marks here being a choropleth or a polygon representing the state, and a point or a dot representing the city. The cool thing about layers is that it now opens up a third axis for you in Tableau, and that is an axis you can use to create more richer maps or richer data visualizations. Joe Mako, who was a former Zen Master and just one of my favorite Tableau developers, once said, Tableau is a data-driven drawing tool. And when you think about it, Tableau in its simplest form is rendering points onto a 2-dimensional canvas, X and Y, to make a data visualization, a map, whatever. And with that, it facilitated a ton of creativity. But you were still constricted to essentially 2 dimensions, your X axis and your Y axis. With layers, you now have access to a 3rd dimension or a Z axis, and not just for maps. So today we're going to be talking about both maps and data visualizations with layers. So first, maps. So when I think about geospatial tools, I generally think of ArcGIS, QGIS. These are tools that I still use QGIS, but I used to use ArcGIS a lot in a previous life. But these are tools with really sophisticated geospatial capabilities. And all those tools, both those tools, ArcGIS and QGIS, rely on spatial layers, layering spatial shapes one on top of each other. And there are really three types of spatial layers: points, lines, and polygons. And you can see here, this is a screenshot of QGIS. All my layers are rendered here. So there's up to 13 layers. They're all stacked on top of one another, each other to make a composite map image. And this approach really facilitates geospatial analysis, like flattening, merging, interpolation, things you're doing, geoprocessing you're doing to map layers to create or analyze geospatial data or to create richer maps. Tableau has really mostly been a geospatial rendering tool, rendering maps, putting maps onto a screen. Not so much a geospatial processing tool or for geospatial analysis. But lately, they've been moving into that business with some new features like distance, buffer, make line, make point. These are new calculated fields, relatively new calculated fields that really enhance their geospatial capability. So with that come layers. So let's make a map with layers. So again, I'm using Superstore data set. I'm going to add state to my window. I'm not going to make it a star. Oops, sorry. Make it a map. I'm going to add region as a color. I'm going to also add region as a separate layer. So I'm going to drag region on, and you'll see a new mark on the screen called Add Marks Layer. This is what's new about 2020.4. And so when I drag that on, a new mark is rendered called region. I'm going to hide the old one. I'm going to make this a map. I'm going to reduce the transparency. I'm going to add the border. I'm going to bring back up my state. I'm going to color these by sales as opposed to by region. And I'm going to reduce the border. So now I have two polygons. I have a region, which is the big polygon, this thing. And then I have state polygons underneath. The thick black border around the states is our region. And we just have them stacked on top of one another. So let's add some more. So I'm going to add a regional headquarters city to my map. Again, add marks layer. Now I'm into my third layer. This is a mark that I created, which is just a single city that I'm calling the headquarters for each of the regions. I'm going to change it to a star. I'm going to make it bigger. And I'm going to make it labeled. And I'm going to change the color to black. And I'm going to make it a little bigger. So now I have three layers: polygon for region, polygon for state, and a mark for my headquarters. And I'm going to add another one. So city. I'm going to add state in there as well. I'm going to make it a circle. Add sales to my size shelf and profit to my color shelf. I'm going to make these much bigger. And I'm going to add a black border just so it stands out. So now I have a map with four layers, three different types of marks: a choropleth mark or a polygon mark representing the state or the region, a star, and a circle representing the city. And I could do that just by simply adding layers one on top of each other. I can also do things like move the layers up and down. So if I want to move the region up to the top so that I select it before anything else. I can also disable the selection, so I can never select the region because I don't want to be able to select it. So you click disable selection. You can move them up or down. You can rename the layer. You can also hide the layer so it's not visible at this time, or you can hit the little eyeball, and that'll also make it hidden or visible. And these are all the new layers features. So every layer adds a new mark, and every mark allows you, or mark type, and every mark panel here allows you to customize it with different colors, different tooltips, different data encodings, whether it be size or color, and different labeling. And that really opens up the possibility of what you can do with maps, because you're no longer constricted to two layers and two mark types. And disabling the selection unto itself is pretty cool, because if you want to show something on a map, but you don't want the user to ever select that, disabling the selection unto itself is a pretty nifty feature. All right, so I'm going to walk through something else that's possible with maps using the new layers feature. So I have a map, and I'm going to drill down. So I'm going to create a map you can drill down into. So going from region to state to city to store, all with different mark types, all with different levels of geographic granularity. And if you have questions, I see some Q&A coming in there. We're going to have questions at the end, so I'll make sure to address all of them. We're leaving plenty of time for Q&A. So I have my region layer. I'm going to make my state layer visible as well. And now what I want to be able to do is that when I click this state, I want to move into a level of granularity that's different. So I'm at a macro view of the United States. When I click into Texas, I want to see just Texas. So I'm going to make just Texas visible. And so this is a selected state layer that was visible based on my parameter action. So when I clicked, moving back up, when I clicked Texas here, it changed my state parameter here using a parameter action here, setting the destination, changing the state that I selected to change the parameter. And then this layer, selected state, is only visible when I select that layer, or when I select that state. State selected. So when my state parameter equals my state, then only render that state, which again here is Texas. I also want to show city. So moving again back up, when I click down from region to state, down to this Texas, I want to see all the cities where I have superstores in Texas. And I see Houston, and now I want to click down and see all the stores that I have in Houston. So when I click Houston, I want to see specific stores and sales represented as pie charts, size by the total sales, and the size of the wedges are sales by category. So now I have 3 layers, a national view down to a state view, down to a city view, down to a store view. So I have specific stores, and at each layer, polygon, dot map, pie map, we have different mark types. And all this is available and possible because you have parameterized your layers, and whether those layers are visible to your user based on parameter selections. So I'm going to walk through another map. So this is a map of a park near my house where my daughter and I go hiking a lot. And so I want to walk through is how to create a customized map that doesn't use really any geospatial base layers. So the old map used Tableau's base polygons or base maps. This is not using any of them. So I'm going to walk you through how to create that. So I drag park background. So within my data, let me show you my data first real quick. So in my data, I have lots of different mark types. So this map is going to be comprised of trails that we hike in, roads that intersect those trails, trees, points of interest like things to do in the park, as well as the overall border of the park. And all those are unioned together as CSV files into my data set called South Mountain here. That's the name of the park. So first what I do is I drag park background onto my screen. I'm going to add the name of the layer, and then I'm going to convert it into a polygon using this distance calculation, which was created outside of Tableau. And the distance calculation is essentially the distance between all these points, and it allows me to connect them as a polygon. So I'm going to convert it to a polygon, add my distance to the polygon shelf. I'm going to change this to green, like a park. And now I have my base polygon, which is the shape of my park. Next, I'm going to add a trail level. So I take trails, add it as a marks layer here. I'm going to add name. I'm going to add distance again to connect my lines. I'm going to convert it to a line mark, connect the path, and add one more level of granularity. And then I'm going to change the color of it based off of the name of the trail. So now I have 2 marks. I have a polygon mark, which is the park background, and I have a line mark. And you can see the trails here colored in my color legend. And what we're going to do is then keep building on top of this map. So the last thing I'm going to show how to build off is a third mark type, which is a point, which I call icons small. These are points of interest in the park that you might want to visit if you're hiking there. Again, add name, add POI, and then convert this to a shape, and add POI type to my shape. Make these a little bigger. And now I have the 3 layers within my map. I have a polygon, I have a line, and I have a point. And each of these points represent something to do. A zoo, parking lots, picnic areas. And I've stacked them all together. I don't want to be able to select the background, so I'm going to disable the selection. So now I can't select that background, but I can still select the specific trails, or I could select the specific POIs. And ultimately what I do is I combine these all together into a more complex, richer map here. So I'm going to walk you through turning on each of these layers. So again, the park background, which we've already created, is a polygon. I have within the park there are several lakes and reservoirs that I created as polygons. Between those lakes and reservoirs, there are rivers that connect them. So I have a river layer as a line. That's my first new mark type, which is a line. I also brought in thousands of little trees. So I hand drew these trees and brought them in as custom shapes. And now I'm layering them on top randomly using X and Y coordinates based off of the longitude and latitude that I randomly plotted. These are not real trees. I don't have that much free time. And then I'm going to add in a buffer for the road. So you have a little bit border around the road. A trail glow, so a little ring around the specific trail so they contrast better with the trees, the actual trail, the actual road, a white line that runs through the road so it looks like a US road. Big icons, again, I drew these in Procreate, little icons of features you might want to see. There's a zoo in the park, waterfall, text labels to show you what's being rendered there. I brought these in as shapes, but you can bring these in as text labels, but I brought them as shapes so they have a little like shadow on them. And then a small icon again for my points of interest, parking lots, picnic areas, things to see. And I bring them all together into this dashboard that I call South Mountain, which combines a Figma background that I designed in Figma, as well as a legend, so you can highlight and the map, as well as annotations are in Figma. So this is a composite map that similar to what you would create in QGIS, stacking layers on top of each other, getting richer map layers stacked on top of one another so that the composite is richer than the sum of its parts. So one use case you could use for this is creating your own types of maps. You can create custom building layouts. The other thing you could do similar to this is org charts. So one of the things that my company has asked for is how do we build an org chart to show who's working on what and what is our fill rate and our how many people have we hired in the last few years, how many people have been let go. You can do all these types of things with layering, because you can layer points, lines, and marks all on top of each other. There is a CPU and memory component of this, where as you layer more and more things on top of one another, you're layering and rendering more marks. And one common performance issue you'll always see with Tableau is the more marks you render, the slower you'll see performance be. So it's one thing to keep in mind. You're still seeing that when you layer multiple mark types into your maps. But the ability to be creative, you're no longer bound by 2 dimensions or 2 axes or a dual axis. You're no longer bound by 2 marks. It opens up the number of creative possibilities you can make in Tableau. So that's a real emphasis on geospatial and the type of map things you can do in Tableau. The other thing that layers opens up is the ability to create richer data visualizations or richer graphics. And so if ArcGIS and QGIS are similar to map layers, Photoshop and Procreate and Figma, these types of graphic tools are similar to the types of data visualizations you can create with Tableau layers. So again, the process is much like in map applications, layering graphical images on top of each other, combining them together to create a richer, more beautiful final image. So we're going to walk through it, how to use layers to create a traditional data visualization. So again, I'm going back to Superstore sales. And what we're going to make is a dashboard with 12 mark layers. So 12 different marks over here. That is in a single sheet, and that opens up possibilities for how you can control that dashboard. So I'm going to render my KPI. So this is order sales KPI, and I'm going to walk you through how I made this. So essentially, every geospatial component or every dimension I add in order to render the map layer onto my screen is a geotag component. You cannot leverage the longitude and latitude, the generated lat longs in Tableau, unless there is some sort of geotag property. When you bring in state or city or region or country into Tableau, Tableau often recognizes automatically that this is a state, this is a city, this is a country, and it geotags it for you. In order to leverage map layers, you still need to generate lat and long. So even though it's counterintuitive because it seems like you're making a map, you are in fact not making a map. You are rendering points on a screen, leveraging the generated lat long. And so how do we generate that lat long? So the orders KPI, so this circle here, is generated by this make point. Oh, I'm sorry, this is orders, I apologize. This is orders, I meant sales. So it's leveraging this make point. Make point creates a geotag dimension, which then produces our generated lat long. And the make point I'm creating is y is 2 and x is 1. So that is essentially a grid. So my y, or my latitude, is row, even though this seems to be row 1, it is row 2 because it's in reverse order. And my x, or my column, it is column 1. So 2 and 1. So when I go and add my profits KPI, and I edit it, the make point here is 2, 2. So you're dictating where it's laying out on the visualization. So it's laying out on a grid. I'm going to add orders, cost, basket, days to ship. Now I have 6 KPIs. They're labeled. They're labeled based off of dimensions and measures I add to my screen. So days to ship, the difference from days to ship as a wingding. So it's giving me the up or down arrow, and what was my targeted ship time. And that's creating this KPI here with that label. I also want to add in Sparklines. So I can add in one Sparkline for every single KPI, so I can see its performance over the last 12 months. So, and that is rendered in a similar way. So if I go to sales KPI time, again, it's a geotag dimension, and I'm also using make point. And so the make point here is sales is giving me my Y, or what is going up and down. And my X is order date. So this is the month of order date, sequentially moving from X 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 for December. I'm using this slight map to move it onto my screen so it coordinates with my grid. And now I have a composite data visualization that's comprised of 12 layers making a single sheet dashboard. Now, why would I care about having what you could make in Tableau traditionally as 6 distinct data visualizations combined together in containers, and you wouldn't need to create it in one sheet. So there's a few benefits of doing it this way. One, you could sort the KPIs dynamically. You could set the grid, whether it appears in the 1 spot or whether it appears in the 6 spot, based off of whether or not it's deviating significantly from your goal. So you want your user to see, okay, total sales is way off our target. We want to move this into the top left spot. Or you can have it not appear at all. You can have the mark disappear when it's meeting its goal, or have it only appear when it's missing its goal. You can sort them differently, and you can have them sort dynamically or change the sorting based on what the user wants to see. And you don't have to use containers. I don't like containers. I find them unintuitive. I just struggle with laying them out to my screen. And the other issue with containers is responsive design. So my layout needs to flex as my screen gets larger or smaller or mobile or desktop. With setting the grid and the format, you're not leveraging containers, but rather setting the grid based off of whether or not the customer and whether the customer's viewing it via desktop or on a big screen or a small screen, you can have the grid respond dynamically. And you don't have to worry about containers collapsing or sheets not being seen. The other thing you can do is zoom. So this again is a single sheet dashboard comprised of 4 different visualizations: a donut chart made here with this layer, a line chart, another line chart, and a map representing states, size by sales. And one of the things that's always been somewhat annoying about Tableau, which is available in other software, is that when I want to zoom into a portion of the dashboard, Tableau generally recommends you don't zoom into it, you jump out of it and move to a different worksheet. But with layers, you can add a little button that allows you to zoom in. So essentially the responsive grid, because you're gridding things all on one worksheet, is telling the other visualizations you're rendering to disappear or to go away. And when you zoom in and come back, when you zoom back out. Same thing with this map. Zoom in, and when you click out, go away. So this zoom, this little magnifying glass, is triggering a parameter action. Oh, sorry. I guess it's a dashboard action. It's triggering a parameter action, which changes what I want to zoom into. And it is telling which chart should come into focus. And therefore, it is telling each of these make point elements whether to go away or not. So let's take a look at one of those make point elements. So again, layer donut is one layer in here. I created it over here. Using make point, it's telling me the spot it's going into is 0.45 on the y-axis and 0.5 on the x-axis.
Hey,
and when, yep.
Sorry, would you be able to just zoom in on those calculations a little bit when you open them, please?
1 second. There we go.
Perfect.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
And again, if you are asking, if you do want to reverse engineer this will be on my website. But yeah, if you're not seeing it, then it doesn't make sense for me to open it. But the make point is essentially telling my y-axis as I want the pie to be at this portion of the y-axis and this portion of the x-axis. Let's go to the map layer. So I'm going to hide these. And I go to my map layer. I'll find it here. And the map layer is saying, I want to make my point based off of a state Y coordinate that I created based off of where the state is being rendered and a state X coordinate. And then I'm moving it over slightly just so that it fits within my screen. And when the parameter is equal to map, then it will render this, or when the parameter is equal to all, it will render this. So essentially, if no chart is selected over here in my chart parameter, it's going to show all the visualizations. And if only one is selected, it's only going to show that one. So it's essentially going to zoom in. So this parameter here, it's going to zoom in. This parameter is going to zoom in. So it's going to occupy the whole screen. And so that makes a zoomable dashboard. It's a responsive dashboard that allows users to interact with your dashboard, and it makes for a richer experience. All right, we're going to talk about how to create richer maps by combining a traditional map layer with data visualizations on top of those map layers. So in the past, the only type of map chart combination you can make is a pie chart on top of a map. And pie charts have their purpose. We just used it in the previous dashboard, but they are not great data visualizations. And so if you want to create a line or a bar chart, that was incredibly tricky. It was possible, but not probable and not very simple to do. And you couldn't make very rich line or bar charts. So we're going to walk through how to do that right now. So first I have my my county layer. This is just the counties in Arizona. So we're going to look at election results in the state of Arizona for the 2020 election, presidential results. So this is just a county choropleth for Arizona, showing the counties in Arizona, which was a critical state in the election. We're going to add a little dot for how many voters were in that. So you could always do dot maps in Tableau. The dot just represents how many voters were there. Maricopa County being the biggest county here. And again, we use a make point. I don't think I need to show how to make the dot map, but I'm going to walk you through how to make the line map. In order to make a line map, I need axes. I need a y-axis and I need an x-axis. And so in order to create a y-axis, I have to get a little, you have to get a little creative. So I'm going to walk you through how to do that. So this is my y-axis, how I'm creating it. And so essentially I'm using a make point. I'm using the latitude and longitude for the county. So where the center of the county was, so that it appears aligned to the county. And I'm only using 2 years. I'm using 2020 and an old year so that I have 2 points to render. So I have 2020, which is selected here, and another point, which is essentially another year, minus 2000. So what that's giving me is a start of the line, so the base of the line here, where it starts, and the top of the line, because I need two marks to render in order to create the line. And so that's what this calculation is doing. It's adding a mark or a line or points on a line to my latitude and longitude, so it still appears on top of my counties. And then I'm converting the mark type to a line, and then I'm adding a little Y label on one of them so you know what that line represents. I'm also adding a reference line. So this is only looking at Democratic and Republican voting in Arizona. The reference line is 50-50, so where it's closer, there's a closer contest in the county. And again, this is using the same type of approach we use for the y-axis, but it's using it on the x-axis and rendering it halfway between the y-axis line. So now I'm going to have two line charts which show a change over time, which is election voting in the state of Arizona for, I think, the last 5 elections. So for the last 20 years. And so what this, and I'm going to also add a county label, just so you know which county you're looking at, in case you're not familiar with the geography of Arizona, which I'm not. So what this allows you to see is Maricopa County, which is an incredibly important county, was into the national election, but also into the state of Arizona, had a pretty significant steady change over time over the last 20 years, from 2000, where it was 53% Republican, to this last election where it was just narrowly more Democratic. And this made the difference in the election for the state in giving all the votes to President Biden. And this is a richer map. This is not something you can create with pie charts, not something you can create right now with Tableau, but I'm going to show you how to create specific lines as well, so that you have understanding how that's done. But it's done a similar way to the y-axis. So again, using make point, oh, I'll zoom in, my apologies. So using make point, I use lat and long, which is the center of the county. I want to take GOP votes divided by total votes, which gives me my percentage. So these are absolute votes divided by total votes. And then I want to move it up or down relative to the center of my county, just so it visually looks nice. And then my year, same thing with my year. I'm going to move from 2000 to 2020 by moving the year either 0 points from, well, actually from either -10 from the center, which is 2010, which I set here. So 2000 is -10 and 2020 is +10. And divided by 40 just to move it around on my map based off of how I want it to look. So those are line maps. I combine it all together in this dashboard here. And I also allow the user to hide or unhide the total votes in case they don't care about those things based off of a little toggle animation button I created. But that's tied to a parameter. Arizona bars. This is bar maps, not actual bars. How to create that, similar county. I get my y-axis, get my label, get my Democratic bar, and my GOP bar. And again, this is only for 2020. I can change it with a parameter to show different years. And so now what we're seeing is just for a single year, the bar really highlights more clearly the difference more clearly than a pie chart would, the difference between Democratic voting in Apache County versus GOP voting, and how narrowly Joe Biden won Maricopa County than President Trump or ex-President Trump. And I combine them together here on bars on a map and allow the user to toggle with a little animated slider here to change the year. So that's bars and lines on a map. I have one more thing I want to show you. So this is a painting of my house. So when I'm going back to rendering our layers as a similar tool to Photoshop and Procreate and Figma, these graphic design tools. Those tools are obviously rooted in painting more historically. And painting, the way you paint, the way real painters paint, is by layering things on top of each other. They layer your background, your clouds, they layer your foreground on top of that. Once the paint has dried, they layer shadows and detail and context, and all this is done through layers. So similarly, this is a painting of my house done in Tableau with 6 layers. And I would unhide and hide these layers, but it's rendering a lot of points, and it's a little computationally intense. But every mark on this data visualization is a brushstroke that I created in Procreate and brought in as a shape into Tableau, and then render it on an X and Y axis and colored using a separate tool in R. But what I'm allowed to do with the new map layer feature in Tableau is have a background layer, which is my clouds, a house layer, which shows my house, a detail layer to show the windows and a little more finer parts of my house, a shrub layer, the green part here, to show trees and bushes, and all painted with a different brushstroke, and then an accent layer to show shadows and depth and richness of color. So this is obviously really not a practical use for Tableau. You're probably not gonna, your business isn't gonna ask you to make a painting of my house using 2020.4. But this speaks to, sorry it's spinning, but these are a lot of points. This speaks to the level of complexity and the level of richness you can get with layers in Tableau by essentially telling Tableau, these are the marks I want to render on the screen. This is the type of mark that I want to render. This is where I want it to go using make point or some sort of X and Y coordinate, leveraging Tableau's automatically generated latitude and longitude. This is how I want it to look, and this is how I want those layers to combine to produce my final image. So there are a lot more resources on how to do this with cleaner walkthroughs of step-by-step how to do this, including on my website. But the best resource, in my opinion, is Jeff Schaefer's Data Plus Science. He wrote one of the first blogs about using layers and layering marks in Tableau 2020.4. So I encourage you to check out his article. The other ones to check out are Luke at Tessellation wrote Beyond Dual Axes, again, similar to what Jeff wrote. Mark really focuses on map layers and layering geospatial components on maps. And then Sam Parsons did how to create richer traditional business charts like pie charts with layers. So I'm going to pause there and see if anyone has any questions, which, judging by the Q&A, I think you do.
Yes, there is quite a lot of questions in there for you, Adam. But I just want to say thanks again. That has literally like blown my mind. So yeah, but let's get on to some of the questions. Would you like me to read them to you, or are you okay reading them and then answering them yourself?
I can read them. I see them here in the Q&A. So what's the maximum limit number of layers and marks on the newer version? There is theoretically no maximum. It is, you know, this thing's still spinning. I think it's really based on how many marks you're rendering. So you can have 1,000 layers rendering one mark a piece. I don't know why you would do that, but theoretically you can have an infinite number of layers. There's no, and I haven't tried. I don't see why I would. But there's no cap where it says you've reached the maximum number of layers. It's really about performance and points and where you start to see a performance drop off. What did you use to generate the distance calculation for the polygons? So that was I generated that in QGIS. So QGIS is essentially converting my shapefile, which I made in Google Maps, converting my shapefile to a vertice file, and then I exported the vertice file into a CSV. The distance is really, and I'll have a link in my article on how to do this, or you can read through a walkthrough how to do this on Twitter, on my Twitter handle, but which is @McCann. But the distance calculation is essentially how far each point is from one another, and that creates the path so that they're all tied together. So essentially, the closer the point, the smaller the number, and then Tableau knows to use that to connect the points together to minimize distance. Where do you get data sets specifically? Where did you get the data for your park trail demo? So I made that in Google Maps, and then I brought it over into QGIS to do the processing, really just to convert the points from a shapefile to a CSV file. So this is actually what I made in Google Maps using the My Maps function. I created all the layers and the trails, and then I exported them as KML files. You can go here and export as a KML file, and then convert the KML to a shape, and a shape to a vertex, and a vertex to a CSV. So very simple, but I'll include a walkthrough how to do that on my website. Can you explain the parameter action to drill down to Texas again? Sure. Drill down maps, okay. So at my top layer, I have nothing selected. There's no parameter selected. There's no state parameter that's changed. So it's rendering everything. The regions are rendered, and the all states are rendered, this dimension I created here. When I select Texas, it's changing the state parameter to Texas here. And my state selected layer, which is this dimension here, the state selection layer says when that state parameter equals the state in my data set, then only render that state. Otherwise, when we're showing the city, then render nothing. Also, else null. So otherwise, never show the state. So the state will only appear when I've selected Texas over here. And then when I select the city, you'll notice that Texas goes to none and the state disappears. And now I'm at the city level of granularity. And when I go to my city state parameter, you'll see I have Houston selected here, and it knows to only show the stores in Houston. When I click a pie wedge, it essentially clears both the parameters, returning it to none, and returning my map back to the regional view. How do you prepare the data to create the park viz, especially the distance technique to create a polygon? I'll include a walkthrough how to do that. It's a little bit time consuming, but you still need to use QGIS to create that distance calculation. But a lot of the things, most of the things I've created here leverage Superstore sales. There's no geoprocessing. Assume you can run a layer over your Strava and other tracking data. Exactly, you can do that. You can bring in Strava data, which is, I think, nicely prepared for you already via an API that Strava has available to you. Can you add layers from different data sets, or do you need to union the multiple data sets? So that is a great question. And unfortunately, the answer is you can only use one data set. So if I were to go in here and try to bring in another layer. So I'm in my Superstore. If I wanted to bring in something from another data set, the lat and long, generated lat long, which I would use to add my layer, is grayed out. And even if I were to try to add a geocoded property, it says no, secondary fields and blending are not supported for layer business. So you still have to union, which is annoying and a limitation. But the nice thing about it is if you union all your data together, you can create a rich map, whereas before you're only able to create a 2-axis map or 2-layer map with multiple data sets. So yeah, it is a big limitation. Do you think layers will become available in other chart types in the future? Scatterplot, it already is available in scatterplots. If you look at the example that Jeff Schaefer has on his website, Data Plus Science, he shows you how to walk through a scatterplot. It's just using lat and long, the generated lat and long. So the X and Y coordinates are associated with some sort of measure that relates to that you would use in a scatter plot. It's just rendering them using lat and long. But yeah, it works for other chart types. In the point calculation on the regional sales by state, you mentioned the subtraction was to Subtraction was to move it slightly to make it fit. Is that something you just know, or is it basically just trial and error to find out what looks good? It's trial and error. Yeah, it's trying to move the data around on my screen. It's essentially like moving a visualization onto a dashboard, just trying to make it look right. The X and Y coordinates are a little more responsive, and you can encode value to them so that they can sort or arrange as you want to see it based off of customer user selection. But yeah, it's trial and error. Can you show zoom in a line chart, like when I move cursor to see details? I'm sorry, would you mind clarifying? I don't follow that one. I'm going to move to the next one, sorry. What is performance impact when creating all the extra map layer calculation? It's a great question, Carl. It's still marks related. It's still how many marks you're rendering. The calcs are not like an LOD calc is a heavy calc. It's a low performance calc. And whenever you add an LOD, it has, in my opinion, an exponential impact on performance. It's not like an LOD, but it's still a calculation. But most of the performance issues I'm seeing are with how many marks you're rendering. How long does it take to work out the calculations for each of these methods? Are the concepts quite transferable? Yes, I mean, the dynamic, the zoomable map, this thing here, is quite easy to replicate. You're really just saying when a parameter is selected, show a different dimension or show a specific geocoded dimension, which is pretty easy to replicate. The one sheet dashboard, this requires some manual manipulation to lay it out and grid it the way you want. So it requires a lot more work. It's not as one-to-one transferable. How do you recommend starting with the coordinates for the layout? Lots of your positioning included what looked like random decimals. Seemed like it might be a ton of guessing and checking. Brad, it is. It is just like if I were to make a dashboard where I'm, moving things around like this. This is all random, right? There's no science to this, mainly because I can't edit, I can't edit these things until I float them. So I can do this. It's essentially what I'm doing when I do my math, is I'm putting it where I want it to be to make it look nice, which is just like using boxes or moving things around on a grid. How do you recommend starting with the coordinates for the layout? Lots of your position. Oh, I'm sorry. You already answered one. Tammy, when utilizing a lot of marks on a map zip code, for example, is there a preferred way to access the data, join versus relationship for efficient rendering on Tableau server? Yeah, so general rule of thumb, regardless, whether it's layers or really anything in Tableau, it's best to do it in your source data. So whether it be in your CSV before bringing it into Tableau, or creating a new view in your source data warehouse, it's best to pass that off to the underlying data set, whether it be a table in a warehouse or a flat file. The next best is to use Tableau to manipulate, whether it use custom SQL or the union function or the joining in Tableau prep. And then the last best is to do any manipulation in Tableau itself. Just wondering if you can allow users to toggle layers completely on and off once published, rather than controlling different levels with parameters. I noticed you had a toggle on the Arizona map to turn on and off one layer, I think, yep. So that's the other cool thing, is that, I'm turning off a layer entirely so that I don't see, right now it looks like all these counties are equally weighted. If anything, Coquino County looks like it has the most importance because it's visually the largest. But I also want to give the context of how many voters voted. So the size of that dot is important, but I might want to turn it on or off. But yes, you can tell what allow the user to control which layer is being rendered based off of parameters, based off of parameters is the easiest way. Does the performance of the Tableau get impacted as we increase the usage of more and more layers of data? Yep, 100%. It's mostly around marks, how many marks you're rendering. As you add more layers, you're theoretically adding more marks. So can buffer be used to select an area versus highlighting? Yeah, you can still select just like you would a normal map. Yeah, so the same controls are available to you. So I've worked with GIS, but I'm new to Tableau, so maybe a basic question. I've been trying to work with 2 shapefiles, 1 polygon and 1 point, but can't seem to layer them on a single work week. Should I be doing something after linking? Dennis, hit me up on my website or on Twitter. I'd love to work you through it. It's probably a little bit lengthy answer for this, but yeah, I would love to help you with that. How do you start? What formula to use while using make point? Let me see. So I assume you're answering, how do I come up with this number here? The year and this calculation is really to plot my years on my x-axis, because the second part of my make point is my x-axis. So I add my longitude, the center of the county, plus the year. So I want to move, so essentially 2010 is 0, and then I move -10 from the center of that line and +10 from the center of that line for 2020 and 2000. Divide by 40 is, again, I think a lot of folks are asking, how do I decide to divide by 40? That's really just me nudging things around so it looks where I want it to be. I think that's your question. I hope that answered it. How do I combine data sources to add multiple layers and maps? So yeah, it's I did that. Here, I'll walk you through my data set here. I did a union. So if you want to look, I had, from Google Maps to QGIS, I exported, I think, like 18 CSV files. I then did a union. Not all these CSV files are structured the same. They are more or less structured the same, but some have polygons, some have points, some have lines, but they all have X and Y coordinates. And that's really what I'm unioning together. You had mentioned additional resources. Any recommendations for your wealthy experience to begin one's journey to learn how to use maps? So Sarah, Map Overlord, she, I forget it, Sarah Battersby. Lorna, you might be able to help. Is it Sarah Battersby?
Yeah, Sarah Battersby. I'll get a Twitter now.
Yeah, she's the map queen. She's the best person for maps at Tableau. She's fantastic. And she provides a lot of resources there. And so I would follow her on Twitter, and she will really help you out. How are the coordinates determined for non-map visualizations used by MakePoint? Figuring out the desired coordinates or treating other types of graphs from us seems kind of clunky. You had algorithm created your Sparklines. Exactly. So it is kind of clunky. So I'll show you exactly how clunky. So let me show you on this guy here. So my background map is none, but if I convert it to a normal geospatial background map, and I show my view toolbar, and oops, sorry, map options. And I zoom out, you'll see that all my KPIs are in Africa or near Africa. And that's just because that's where they're rendered. That doesn't make any sense, and it is kind of random. Nudging the marks around is manual, but again, I don't think it's any different than nudging your visualizations around. But it just allows you to create a more responsive layout. But it is weird, it is clunky, and maybe they'll eventually move to a place where they're not using longitude and latitude generated, but rather some sort of XY generated. But you just turn off the maps, and essentially you have a normal data visualization. Well, kind of normal. In GIS, there are 4 entities: point, line, polygon, and rasters. Can you add raster layers in Tableau? Yeah, not really. It's a good point, and that's why I didn't bring it up, is that you really can't add raster. I mean, you can add them as base maps using Mapbox or something like that. It's quite tricky to add it as a data visualization layer, and it's quite computationally intested. To prepare GIS data better is use QGIS plugin. It's much easier to create and prepare data sets for Tableau. Yeah, to prepare geospatial data, I generally use QGIS, but you don't need to. If you're doing a little bit more richer visualization like this map, then QGIS is better at rendering my points using my selecting what coordinate system I want to use. Tableau doesn't allow you to alter coordinate systems or anything like that. I use QGIS, but a lot of these maps are used, the Arizona maps don't use anything special. It's just county, where a county is in the United States. There was no pre-processing done in GIS software, and the Superstore, same. It's just Superstore, no processing. Can layers be created programmatically? E number of layers equals number of classes. Yes, in theory, because you can tie the visibility of a layer, not created, but viewed. You can, in order to create a layer, you need to drag it onto the screen. You can tie whether or not a layer is visible or accessible or shown to a user based off of parameters. By zooming in a line graph, I meant positioning it on the part of the line graph. Then the circle will appear at the cursor position with the part magnified 50x. And then position it on one part of the line graph. I'm sorry, Lorna.
I think
do you
this
follow?
is to do with that question from before, saying, can you show zoom in on the line chart, like when I move the cursor to see the zoomed in? Maybe it's to do with viz in tooltips. Can you see the rest of?
You can, if this is what you mean, you can zoom in to specific elements. It renders differently because the size of these things is essentially hard coded. But yes, you still have zoom controls or selection controls with map layers. I hope that answered your question. I'm sorry. I freshly joined your meetup group today. I joined the webinar a bit later. I'm interested to see from the beginning of the dashboard with the zoom function. Can you please explain how?
Yep, the recording will be available on the
Yep.
YouTube, so you'll be able to catch up later. We'll send a link out via Meetup for you, Dranka.
Yep. And the workbook will be on my website, Dueling Data. If you missed that part, it'll be on there. For the executive dashboard, you mentioned the possibility of sorting and showing or not some of the KPIs based on rules compared to laying them out on a dashboard, a specific worksheets, classworks. Could you please detail? Yeah. So, and there's an example of this on my website. But for this one, for example, so my sales KPI, which is a make point right here. The make point, the Y and the X are automatic. So the example on my website changes this coordinate, whether or not it's shown. So I can also just make it disappear. I mean, not make it disappear, but just screw it up. Maybe I don't want to do that, but it's because my axes are dynamic. But you can have it disappear or shown in a different order. So I can change this order. So I can have it appear. Well, I don't want to change that one, so I'll change this one. So I'm going to move total sales over here, and I'm going to move the other one back over there. So I can just tie this number to some sort of rank function or some sort of calculation. So where sales less than target by greater than 1 million, I want to put it in the 1 slot. Where sales greater than target, I want to put it in the 3 slot, something like that. But there's an example of this exact feature, sortable KPI dashboard on my website. You're a 5-time Samsung. How much time do you spend initially in your career to learn and gain experience? Too much time. I don't know. I don't do I do Tableau a little bit at my job now, but I must say I do it for fun, in quotes. But I just like the tool. But yeah, it took a while. I've been using Tableau for a long time, for 9, 10 years, something like that. Is it possible to combine boundaries in Tableau based off aggregation of layers? Let's say LSOA. I don't know. Not yet. That's, I think, where Tableau wants to be, right? Like a QGIS system, you could combine, you can merge layers or interpolate or flatten or whatever. You can't do that mainly because you weren't able to layer things. I don't know if that's where Tableau is going to go. That's a pretty rich data visual, mapping tool, but that would be pretty cool. But no, I don't think so. How would the KPI example look on mobile? So it depends on how you structure your dashboard, but you could either have a responsive, you can either change the layout and see what it'll look like, or you can say, I want to have 2 versions of this. I want to have a mobile one where the grid it only has 1 column, but 6 rows, or a bigger one that has 12 KPIs. When I'm looking at a big dashboard, it has 12 KPIs, depending on this, which dashboard layout I want to use. But you can trigger that based off of the layout and then encode those values into the KPIs themselves, or the make points. So we can parameterize the make point coordinates. Exactly. You can parameterize the make point coordinates and whether or not they're shown. So you could say, you could say, I want a parameter that says put sales in the top left, and it says when that's yes, make the make point 2.1. When that's no, make the make point 1.3. So put it down here. How have you experienced any challenge with adding labels to multiple layers? I've seen some. I've seen it crash, but I've been using this for a while now because as a Zen Master, you get access to this a little bit early. So that might have been in a early version of it, but I have, when I was building this thing, I crashed it a couple times, and this thing took me a while. But yeah, how would the KPI example look? I'm able, I think I answered that one, but you can either make a dynamic responsive grid or have a mobile specific worksheet that has 1 column and 6 rows, or a dashboard that has 12 KPIs, 3 columns and 4 rows, something like that. I think that's it.
Yeah, that seems like all the questions. There was a lot of questions there, but yeah, thank you so much, Adam. It's been a great pleasure to have you here. And I think you've blown the minds of at least 200 people today, just with the sheer amount of knowledge you have given to us. So thanks again. There was one last question that says, can we have a Tableau workbook? But I think that's on your website, right?
Yeah, I'll publish it tonight,
Perfect.
East Coast, US time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'll be on my website and you can download it.
Yeah, we'll add it to the YouTube link as well so that you can go directly to it. But once again, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoyed creating the content for us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Bye, Lauren.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.